Hello, and welcome to my presentation on disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation is a term coined in the 1990s by Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen to describe innovations that make products and services more accessible and affordable, thereby making them available to a larger population. Here we have a definition. Disruptive innovation describes a process by which a product or service initially takes root in simple applications at the bottom of our market, typically by being less expensive and more accessible, and then relentlessly moves upmarket, eventually displacing established competitors. According to the Christensen Institute, disruptive innovations are not breakthrough technologies that make good products better. To understand this, we must first understand that incumbent businesses are generally focused mainly on sustaining innovation. They tend to focus on high value established customers and develop to suit their needs, ignoring the many ordinary customers that may want simple, low-cost alternatives. New entrepreneurial alternatives can emerge to satisfy this demand of these many low-cost customers, gaining a foothold by delivering more suitable functionality, often at a lower price. These disruptors then improve the quality and offer new features, muscling in and finally overtaking the incumbent customers. When mainstream customers start adopting the entrance offerings in volume, disruption has occurred. Let's take an example of one of these. An example of disruptive innovation is the humble transistor radio. In the 1950s, the radio market was dominated by high-quality American manufacturers such as Zenith and RCA. Then, Sony transistor radios arrived on the scene from Japan. They were cheap, small, and portable, but the sound quality was awful. This meets the criteria of disruptive innovation in that the disruptive innovation is often much inferior to the product that it eventually replaces. But for teenagers, transistor radios meant personal freedom and the ability to hear music wherever and whenever they wanted. After all, this was the only radio they could afford. They didn't mind about the inferior quality. Teenage radio listeners were a market that barely existed at the time, and high-end radio companies didn't bother with them. Over time, transistor radio quality got incrementally better, and their popularity followed. Billions were manufactured during the 1960s and 70s. These radios changed the way the world consumed music and radio, sparking a musical and cultural revolution and setting the stage for other personal music players such as the Walkman, CD players, and eventually smartphone, music, MP3, etc. But by this time, companies like RCA and Zenith were already far behind. One more modern example of a disruptive innovation is Netflix. Netflix is a classic example of disruptive innovation that used a new business model and technology to disrupt an existing market. Throughout the 1990s, things looked different as Blockbuster was expanded rapidly and dominating the video rental industry. Netflix initially offered a DVD by mail rental service, only later launching its online subscription-based movie streaming service. Today, its on-demand, all-you-can-watch movie platform is used by over 150 million people globally. As I said, Blockbuster dominated the home rental market. The multi-billion-dollar company had over 9,000 video rental stores globally, and it employed nearly 85,000 people worldwide. In the 2000s, however, Blockbuster started to lose significant revenue as Netflix came in and targeted segments that had been overlooked by Blockbuster. The DVD by mail service was a lot more convenient for people, and Netflix targeted this market. In the beginning, Netflix mail-in movie subscription wasn't attractive to Blockbuster's mainstream customers, but rather to those early adopters who were already used to online shopping. So they could go online, order their DVDs, and receive them in the post. In fact, Netflix did not reach the mainstream until after disrupting itself from its DVD mail service to set up online streaming. When previously people had to go to the store to rent a movie, as well as to return it, they could now access a variety of films and TV shows with fixed monthly subscription fee without having to leave their homes. When Netflix changed to its subscription-based business model, Blockbuster was still earning millions. However, eventually, Blockbuster was completely squeezed out of the market and Netflix became dominant. Some current disruptive innovations that haven't quite taken foothold but may do so in the future. One example is 3D printing. 3D printing is a manufacturing process that has been developing steadily since around 1984. The process allows three-dimensional objects to be printed from digital data. When three-dimensional designs are created using specific software applications, digital data can be sent to a 3D printer. The output is a three-dimensional object, which is printed in sequential layers using different materials. This has the potential to disrupt current manufacturing process. If you can print small items in your home using easily affordable 3D printers, then why would you go to the shop to buy small things? For example, the casing for a pen that you've lost. This has the potential to really disrupt plastics manufacturing and small scale design. Another example is Bitcoin, or the technology that is built upon, which is blockchain. As we've already mentioned, a disruptive technology and innovation is one that's simpler and cheaper than what's already on the market. But oftentimes, the disruptive innovation is inferior to what's already on the market. Currently, the financial system works quite well for people. People are used to the processes. People can use their online banking to transfer money. Bitcoin at the moment isn't as accessible and easy to use for people. However, the technology that it's built upon, blockchain, has potential to really take off in this area. This is comparable to when PCs, or personal computers, first came on the market. The first PCs were very much less capable than the mainframes that were already established at the time. They had less powerful hardware and software and little, if any, customer support. If you'd asked a hobbyist around the 1970s what PCs were good for, you probably wouldn't have had a good answer. So currently, a lot of the discussion around Bitcoin is it useful? What can it be used for? And it's not as easy to use as current cash and financial systems. However, the platform which is built on blockchain has the potential to disrupt innovation can also be preserved by incumbent companies. One good example is at Intel in the 1990s. Andy Grove was a disciple of Christensen's theory of disruption, and the Celeron processor was a direct result of Grove's following Christensen's take on disruption and what to do about it. Intel created the Celeron as a reaction to disruptive innovation. The Celeron was introduced in response to Intel's loss of the low-end market, in particular to AMD and the IDT Win chip. Intel's existing low-end product, the Pentium MMX, was no longer performance competitive. Although a faster Pentium MMX would have been a lower risk strategy, the industry standard Socket 7 platform hosted a market competitor CPUs that could be drop-in replacements for the Pentium MMX. Instead, Intel pursued a budget part that was to be pin compatible with their high-end Pentium 2 product. The Celeron also effectively killed off the 9-year-old 80486 chip. And by the late 90s, early 2000s, all mostly low-end computing products had Celeron chips. So Intel managed to preserve innovation and use a reaction to disruptive innovation to corner the low-end market as well as dominating the high-end market at that time with our Pentium chips. This concludes my presentation on disruptive innovation. Thank you very much.